It's my great pleasure to welcome Jordan from Hoop Vision 68 to our show. So, can you please talk to my audience just maybe a little bit about yourself and your age, and how did you get into YouTube?
Well, thank you for having me. I am 28 years old. I was happy to find out before we started recording that you thought I was older than that based on the videos. So that's good. I got into YouTube. Technically, I've had the channel for a lot of years, but I started really making videos with the intent of building up like a channel about 3 or 4 years ago. And I've been Hoop Vision, which is the name of my company and also YouTube channel, as a junior in high school. So about what
Wow.
12 years ago or something like that. Yeah. And YouTube at that time existed. Don't get me wrong, it existed, but you weren't going to be a YouTuber, or that didn't seem like a thing at the time,
Yeah.
especially in the sports world. So what I was really doing at the time was blogging. Blogs were really big. It was before like Twitter was huge, and Twitter kind of replaced blogs. But I had a website where I wrote about college basketball and I analyzed different things. That led me to get hired by some college basketball teams. So I worked 3 seasons on coaching staffs at the Division 1 level. My basketball knowledge really grew from all of that experience, and so I left and I decided to restart Hoop Vision after those 3 years. It was a YouTube channel, a podcast, a newsletter, a Twitter account, all of these things. And to be honest with you, the YouTube channel didn't do that great at first. I wasn't that good at making videos at first. And some of my other parts of the business were doing a lot better, but I just loved making YouTube videos. And I'm like personally obsessed with YouTube a little bit. And so as I started to get better, it's now become a bigger and bigger part of my business, which has been exciting. So I'm like at the first point where I can start to maybe call myself a YouTuber here.
So, which team did you work for actually?
So I worked for two. I was at University of Nevada and at New Mexico State University. New Mexico State is probably most famous for Pascal Siakam. He went there. Um,
Were you working for them while he was playing?
I got to New Mexico State as Pascal Siakam was declaring for the draft, so we overlapped by like a couple days. But yeah, yeah.
Bummer. That would have been so sweet.
A couple NBA guys that I coached, they've been in and out of the NBA, but Jamario Jones, he's been on the Lakers roster. I don't know if you know that name, but he's been between the G League and the NBA. So we had a few guys like that are like G League NBA type players.
Like borderline NBA players. Yeah.
Exactly,
Hmm.
exactly.
Cool, cool. Do you do any coaching right now, or do you just run your company on a daily basis?
But what I do as a part of my business is consulting for different teams. So I work with coaches at the college level, how to implement analytics and different X's and O's type of stuff. Again, with the way the YouTube channel is growing right now, I'm reaching a big audience all of a sudden. But initially, my business was more directed towards coaches, and it's expanded out now since then.
Holy shit. Excuse my language. I didn't know you were that big time. Like we have 3 professional leagues now in Taiwan. So if you're ever looking for a coaching job overseas,
Sure.
hopefully this video will blow up and maybe, teams from Taiwan will start calling you. Like, wow,
There we go. There we
consulting,
go.
that sounds amazing. So like, what do you do? Like you install their offense for them, or like design their defensive scheme, or like, what do you do?
More so evaluate their existing scheme. And by no means when I work with a team are we trying to like overhaul everything, but big term that I use with teams I work with are marginal gains, so to make marginal improvements in different areas. I have like a data science and analytics background that a lot of coaches don't have, so I get to use both the scouting stuff, but then also the numbers too.
The biggest issue in Taiwan right now is often when you have a video, like talk about, let's say, a play, say like pistol or double drag or anything like
Yep.
that, people will watch that video and then they will try to install it in their offense without knowing their personnel and like things like
Yep.
that. Like what would be your recommendation when thinking about installing an offense for a, like, let's say, a high school team?
What you just said about personnel, the players that you have absolutely matters. The other thing that I would say, I think about like the San Antonio Spurs when they had Duncan and Parker and Ginobili, and everyone was copying their plays. Their plays were called motion weak and motion strong. They are extremely simple. Like coaches were obsessed with them, but those plays are as simple as it gets for NBA plays. But what made it so great was how good those players were at reading the defense and reacting to how they were being guarded in those situations. And so the lesson there, and what I would recommend working on as a younger level coach, is not so much the specific actions that you're running, but like the intent at which you're running those actions with, and working on the reads against the defense. And quite frankly, we saw a lot of teams copying the Spurs during that time, and their offenses weren't very good, which I think kind of speaks to what your question was. So it's like teaching how to play as opposed to just teaching straight plays.
Yeah, I see the funniest one is if you run 5 out when you don't have any shooters. Like that's just hilarious to me. But
Yes.
anyways,
Yes.
let's get back to YouTube. Like I love your videos, like especially the one with where Curry was double teamed the whole game, Davidson versus Loyola. Because I know you talk about how difficult it was to even get the tape.
Yeah.
So, like, how much work do you put into one of these, strategy videos or plays, or like the one where you say you watched every college championship game for the past
Yep.
like 30 years or whatever? Like that one, like just looking at that one, I'm like, oh Jesus, like how much time did you put in?
Yeah, so it definitely differs. I think NCAA championship one you just mentioned was probably one of the longer ones for sure. And actually, the Steph Curry Davidson one was probably one of the shorter ones, only because it's just one game. I mean, I did watch some NBA stuff to compare to how he gets played in the NBA. So it does differ depending on the video. The cool thing about that Steph Curry one is, as you mentioned, the actual game footage was not found anywhere on the internet. And so I reached out to their coaching staff and tracked it down. It was a video that had been on my list to make for like years. And then I just never reached out to try to get it. And I finally did it. The way the YouTube algorithm works, like I had a feeling that was going to be a good one. Putting Steph Curry in there,
For sure.
But to go back to your question about how long these things take, the ones where I do the my most recent video on switching tactics, and how that one I'm watching like 10 different teams and comparing leagues and years, and that just takes a long time. I'm proud of the product, but I'm definitely not very efficient with how long it takes. I've tried to estimate how long some of these longer videos take, and I think like 60 to 80 hours is probably the right answer. I'll watch
Holy
when I'm doing
Jesus.
like one. Yeah, exactly. When I'm doing, last year I did a Michigan video, and I think I watched 15 Michigan games to make that video. Like that 15 is a lot of games, right? So fortunately, I love watching film. It's not that I don't love it. But then at the end of my video, the last step in the process is I like animate every play, which I do really think helps the viewer see what's happening. I'll put moving text and graphics in there. I really think it's helped my channel grow, and it helps people watch, but that takes a long time too. It's a cumbersome process to go one by one and animate. So yeah, I think probably the next evolution of my channel is trying to figure out the best way to make these a little bit quicker while keeping the quality, of course.
Yeah. I try to copy your style in one of my videos for like the cut and the switch, like when you put the labels
Yep.
on the guy. And then I
Yep.
gave up after one video. I'm just like, that's too much editing for me. So I gave up. I know you talk about switching just right now and NBA defenses. As NBA fans, when we watch shows like TNT, you listen to guys like Charles Barkley and Kenny Smith, they often talk about how NBA defenses have become so much softer. Like back in our days, defense was never like that. Has NBA defenses really become softer? What's your opinion on that?
It's a super interesting topic, and I think some of the stuff that gets said about back in my day is probably true, and some of it is definitely not true. It's a mixture of both. I think the first thing worth mentioning is, as much as hand checking, hand checking is the biggest thing that gets mentioned as about what has
Absolutely.
changed. And yes, you're not allowed to hand check. That it's going to be called a foul. But when you go back and watch older games, the thing that sticks out is not the hand checking, it's the illegal defense rule, where you weren't allowed to give help without fully committing to the ball. So you either had to double team or not help at all. And that completely changes the game, like way more than the hand checking rules do. It made it a lot easier to play offense. If let's say you're dribbling the ball into the post and you know that defense, they're not allowed to like jab at you and pretend like they're going to help, but then stay. It's either go help or don't. And that just makes it much easier for the offense. As far as the toughness goes, I mean, clearly they weren't quite as quick to call like technical or flagrant fouls as they used to be. So, there's some truth in that to an extent. Player safety is important and making sure people don't get concussions and all that. In general, NBA defenses have gotten much more sophisticated because of the rule changes
Absolutely,
and because of the 3-point line. Definitely more sophisticated. Do they play as hard? I probably haven't watched like the 80s and 90s enough to really say, but the sophistication has definitely increased.
When you talk about that, the game that reminds me so much of what you're talking about just now is the Jazz and the Bulls back in 97 and 98.
Yep.
How many illegal defenses were called just as soon as they passed the ball to Karl Malone. And then you can see like everyone just tries to ISO him. And then if you move a little bit, they call it on you. I'm of the opinion that the defenses are definitely more complicated now, and the lateral movement, just the player, their ability to play defense, I think is a lot more skilled than compared to back in the 90s. So I know you are a college expert on this. So let's talk about the strength and the weaknesses of Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, and also Jabari Smith. What are your thoughts on those three top draft prospects?
I think Jaden Ivey at Purdue is getting his name into the conversation a little bit lately, but those three are still probably the top three. Because I make college basketball stuff, I first and foremost care about how these guys are right now, like from a college basketball perspective. But of course, there's also how they translate to the NBA. And I think Jabari Smith is the most interesting because a lot of people have him as the number one pick right now. He's 6'10". He's a really good shooter. He makes some tough, like Kevin Durant type shots where he faces up and he jab steps and he hits a mid-range jumper or something like that. But the interesting thing about Jabari Smith is he really struggles dribbling the ball. Like he does not want to put the ball on the floor, especially like in crossover or kind of shifty situations. And that's a little bit weird that the number one pick in the draft like can't dribble. It's being a little sensational by saying that, but it's a little bit weird. That being said, he has the capability to be a really good defender. He's a legit like 6'10" or whatever he's listed at. He's long, he's athletic. So the tools are there. It's just sometimes in games, because of his lack of being able to do stuff off the dribble, he kind of disappears a little bit. Then you have Chet Holmgren, who is listed at, I think he might be listed at 7'2", 7'1". The big knock on him is how skinny he is. He's super skilled. He's shooting the ball from three really well, especially in the second half of the season here for Gonzaga. And he can just do things that like no one else can do on the court.
So speaking about Chet Holmgren, just from watching his highlights, obviously you're the expert here, so please educate me on this. What is the difference between him and Bobo? Like I compare their stats, I look at their highlights, like I don't understand why Bobo wasn't, a highly touted draft prospects, like he was picked in the second round. Obviously, injury had something to do with it, but still, just looking at Holmgren, what stands out compared to him and Bobo?
Good question. I did a video on Bobo a long time ago. He got hurt in college and he did not play that many games.
Yeah.
But the video was about the little things, which is a little cliche that coaches like to call like, hustle and diving on the floor and being in the right position on defense, the little things. And Bobo,
things you can't tell from the stat sheet.
Exactly. And Bobo was lacking in that, to say the least. Sort of like his polish and his feel. And I mean, hustle is one thing, but just maybe his basketball IQ a little bit. There was a lot of left to be desired with that. Chet Holmgren, all the scouts, the one thing they say about him is he is very tough and, mentally tough, and he plays very hard. Physically, he has some limitations for sure. But the idea with him is that eventually he's the physical is going to catch up to the mental. He's going to get stronger. He's going to fill out. Don't get me wrong, though. There's still a scenario where it turns out somewhat like it did with Bol Bol. It's not a surefire lock by any means. But I remember seeing Chet in high school. He was playing, I think the game might have been against Paolo Banchero. And I mean, he just looked like a guard out there, which Bol had those moments too, for sure. And we didn't see that early on against at Gonzaga in college. One thing that worried me a little bit is he hasn't played his best in their biggest games against the best competition. And I think with him, he is not going to be a very good NBA player next year. Like, it's going to take some time. Right away, there's going to definitely be some struggles.
So what about Paolo Banchero then?
Yep. So he's at Duke. Kind of the opposite of Chet is that I think that if you put Paolo Banchero into an NBA game right now, of the three guys, he'd be the most ready to go. He's got a polished game. He's some similarities to Jabari Smith. He's better at putting on the floor. He's strong, you know, and for his age, especially. Duke has had a bunch of players in the same style. They had Jason Tatum, who's a little bit smaller than Paolo Banchero, obviously worked out extremely well. They also had Jabari Parker, who was a great college player, but didn't work out too well in the NBA. I sometimes go back and forth as to which one he becomes. Does he become Jason Tatum or does he become Jabari Parker?
That's a huge drop off.
That is a huge drop off. Yeah. And to be fair, like, they're not really the same player. Jabari Parker is bigger and like he's more like a 4-5, you know, and Tatum's kind of become like a guard almost. I think all three players are very good, especially right now in college basketball, but they have a wide range of outcomes. It's why I'm not an NBA scout to have to predict these three. But yeah, I mean, they should be the top three picks in the draft.
Speaking of Paolo Banchero, what are your thoughts on his teammate, AJ Griffin?
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
so AJ Griffin, when I was watching his highlights, he reminds me so much of Jimmy Butler. And he's one of my favorite players. I mean, probably defensively, he's not Jimmy Butler, but just looking at the way he catches the ball, the way he gets his shot off, all I see is Jimmy Butler. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so AJ Griffin started out the season not playing that much for Duke, actually. He played, I'm pulling it up right now, like 11 minutes in their first game against Kentucky. And now he's in the starting lineup and playing about 30 minutes a game. He's just a freshman, and that was the reason for why he wasn't playing so much early on. The interesting part about him is he's shooting like 50% from three. And I don't think he has necessarily that reputation of being a particularly good outside shooter. If he's anywhere near that on a long-term basis, I don't know where he's projected right now, but I think he's a first-round pick.
He's top five. He's top five
Top
now.
five. Oh, okay. Yeah.
According to NBA draft, anyways. Ahead of Paolo Banchero, actually, believe it or not.
That's probably in the last couple months what's happened with his stock. And actually, Jimmy Butler is probably a good comparison because I'm not sure if you're familiar with his college career, but he started out as like he was playing like the post early on in his college career. He's playing the post and then he slowly became more and more into a wing. AJ Griffin's not playing the post, but he's not Duke's go-to guy at this point. He's kind of a role player. And so I think that follows Jimmy Butler's trajectory a little bit of like starting out in a different role and working his way up. Jimmy Butler stayed in college for multiple years. I don't think that's going to happen with AJ Griffin. So he's going to have to change that in the NBA itself. But I like that comparison.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for being on the show, Jordan. If there's one video you could recommend my audience when they visit your channel, which video would it be? I know I tried to ask you to pick your favorite video and that was very difficult for you. So I'm changing the question now for you. Like, what's the one video you would like my audience when they visit your channel to click on?
I think it would probably be the most recent one that I did because the reason why is I think if you're an NBA fan or you're a college fan or both, as long as you like basketball, you're going to like that video, I think. So it's called The Defensive Tactic That Changed Basketball. It starts out talking about some of the stuff we talked about with how the game has changed defensively. And then it's a combination of statistics and X's and O's. And I think that you'll probably appreciate defense and the strategy that goes into it a little bit more after watching it. And I'd love it if you checked it out.
Well, thank you so much, Jordan. Words can't describe my appreciation for you to agree to being on the show. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Roger. And congratulations on your YouTube success as well.